Good evening, friends. A warm welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of South Asia. We are delighted to have the Ambassador of Cuba as our chief guest this evening. He will be speaking about Cuba-India relations. Most of us are familiar with Cuba, particularly Fidel Castro, who was widely popular here. Che Guevara was also an iconic figure. So, Cuba has been putting up a brave fight in spite of the sanctions by the United States. And I was reading in the papers that it is the world's most important country which has come up with sustainable agricultural development. I want to congratulate the people of Cuba and the ambassador in particular for this remarkable achievement. So when the sanctions were imposed by the Americans, I think Cuban people worked very hard and came up with solutions to solve their problems. So to tell us all about what Cuba has been like and relations between our two countries, Ambassador.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this meeting or gathering with all of you. I really don't, when you invite me to come here to talk about the 60 years of our bilateral relation, I was thinking, what can I say to a group of journalists that probably they are more updated from the international issues than an ambassador. So what can I say? So I think that instead of presenting here a press conference or whatever, let's do it better. Let's do like a conversation, a talking, so that we can win a little time, and according to the possibility of time, and of course according also to the possibility of what can I say, because many things I don't know, then let's have this kind of a conversation, if you agree. That is number one. You agree? And number two, I think that perhaps as in introduction, I will read something that that I found, and I found it interesting. And that is precisely, you know, that the first Cuban delegation that came to Delhi, the first one, almost 9 months after the triumph of the Cuban Revolution, was precisely Comandante Che Guevara. He traveled Asia. He visited several countries in Asia, and of course, the main goal for that was to discover how is the feeling of the people of the developing countries, the so-called third world, and how the new revolution could adapt to this group in its external policy. So he decided, Fidel Castro sent him to Asia, and one of these countries, of course, had to be Delhi. So I took from his report, the report from Che Guevara that he made after the trip to several countries, I tried to take some things that he wrote. And And in that occasion, he mentioned, and I quoted Che, Nehru was the son of the wealthy Brahmin from Kashmir, educated in the best school in England, graduated as a lawyer at the University of Cambridge. He renounced from a very young age to a simple life to serve the cause of his people. He was a disciple of Gandhi. Gandhi himself pointed him as his successor when he said, Gandhi said, the Mahatma Gandhi said that Nehru will be his successor, and then Che said, now, after I come to India, I had the meeting with Gandhi's successor. So trying to present that what Mahatma Gandhi thought and planned related to the leadership of this country, he had this opportunity to have a meeting. And then he said that he entered, let me see where, he entered the house or the office of Nehru, and we saw and we share in his office with a simple man, a man dressed in white completely and with this shaped kepi's cap. And also we found in him a very friendly person, humble in his expression, with any kind of vanity, with sad gaze. We shook his hand and he asked us to sit down. We immediately hand over a box of tobacco as a souvenir. And suddenly he established a sincere, friendly conversation about the development of issues in India and Havana. In that moment emerged our friendship. That has been written by Che almost 60 years ago. So you can imagine that our relation were based in the principle of our two countries, the defense of independence, sovereignty, and self-determination. And those principles, many others, were then after the program for India, but also the program for Cuba in the framework with NAM movement. So that is why the development of our bilateral relation during these 60 years has been based in a work that was inflected to most of the poor people of this world. And that creates a very, very strong friendship under these years. I would say that after that moment, that principal moment, we established the diplomatic relation. And there was a meeting, a very important meeting in New York during a General Assembly of the United Nations, where Fidel Castro led the Cuban delegation, but also Nehru led the Indian delegation. They gathered together and they decided the establishment of our bilateral relations. Since then, the ties between Cuba and India has been based on a political dialogue that had permitted in our case, the development, of course, also of our economy. Today, after 60 years of relation, I can say that we have worked together in important sectors for Cuba and India, but especially Cuba in sectors that are related with health care. And in healthcare, I will mention, for example, this last year in which we began a cooperation in Ayurveda. And the Cuban government decided recently to include in the general Cuban general health system, include also the system of Ayurveda. That is a very important point. We are working into several projects that we have received credit from the government of India, and these projects most of them are concentrated in one of the most important sectors that Cuba has in its project program for the year 2030, and that is the renewable energy. Cuba is a small country, you know that. We have too little natural resources, too little oil and gas, so that we import most of the half of our necessity in oil and gas. And with the cooperation that Cuba has developed in the field of renewable energy with other countries, but also with India, we will be able to year 2030 to reduce 24% of our import in oil, because we will use it in renewable. So that is for us, of course, a very, very important task. We have also, during these years, we have been working together in the South-South cooperation. I think India is one of the most important country that has helped many countries, mainly in Africa, for the South-South development. And Cuba had, of course, depending to its small possibility, had also included as a main policy the South-South cooperation. I remember when the first president of India that visited Cuba, and that was exactly on the 21st and 22nd of June last year, last year, 2018, that he organized, or he present a conference at the university from Havana. And the main topic of this conference was the goal South-South cooperation. And he mentioned one thing that is a reality, that Cuba, being a very, very small island with 11 millions of inhabitants, we have developed a South-South cooperation in medical sector that has saved millions of people in this world. So with this visit, with the contact and gathering from Fidel and other leaders from both countries, our relation has a history, and it is a history that we hope and I'm sure that will maintain for all these years. Something interesting that you know, but anyhow I have to say, you know that our national hero and our national poet, José Martí, at mid of the 19th century, he visited Caracas, Venezuela. And the first thing he did when he arrived to Venezuela, remember in that time there was no airplane, there was only ships, there was horses and all. Well, at that time, without taking or washing his dust from the travel, the first thing he did, he honored Simón Bolívar. That is the hero of the independence of Latin America. And without making any comparison, I would say that your president, that is what he really did when he visited Cuba. Before arriving Havana, he made a transit, stopped in Santiago de Cuba, and the first thing he did was to honor Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro. So it's a symbol. That is a symbol that independently of ideology, independently of religion, that is things that brings together peoples and leaders. So with that, I will end my introduction of this conversation, and I leave you free to ask whatever you want, and please give me also the liberty to respond according to my possibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Those of you who wish to ask questions, kindly raise your hands. There are microphones on either side. Okay, first this gentleman here.
Sir, I'm Asim Kamal from Press Trust of India. So my question is that recently India has deepened its ties with the US. Has that had an impact on India's Cuban relationship?
No, absolutely, no. No, I will say, of course, we also had during the Obama period, we have a very important approach after almost 50 and some other years of non-relation. We reestablished the diplomatic relation to the United States. And of course, that had no impact against our relation to the principle of Palestine or the other causes of the independence and the social justice in this world. It has nothing to do. I think in the world in where we live, a global world, we have to have relation with everybody, and we have to see that in this relation or during this relation, you have to respect, of course, everybody's interest and everybody's way of thinking. We have in foreign affairs and foreign policy a very, very good work with the diplomat from India. Let's say we work together in the process of the democratization of the United Nations. We almost have the same principle, almost the same principle that we defend in this framework. And we also have the same framework in the way in which we try to make more active the multilateral work in this world. The world has changed. And I think that in a moment like this, in which we need to keep, by any circumstances, peace and life in this planet, we work together in issues like climate change. We work together in issues as environment, that is very, very important for all our countries. And of course, we are also working so that India can also look to the region of Latin America. And I think that, I repeat, in a world in which we live today, there are only exceptions in which, for example, in our case, we don't have diplomatic relation. But I repeat, this issue doesn't interfere in our friendly and sincere relation to India. It's true, our relation with the United States is in this moment worse than ever. I thought that during the Bush Jr. Government or administration, that will be the worst moment of the policy toward Cuba. But after 2007, I will say that the worst of all has been the policy that practiced the administration and the President Trump. He has he focused his policy mainly to set back what Obama did. That is mainly to dismontage all the good steps that we worked together, all the agreement that we worked together. And although Obama did not lift the blockade, and that is one of the main focus in our relation to our friends in the world, the struggle to lift the blockade, the reality that he created and Cuba and the United States create in that time a kind of atmosphere in which we could work in the future independently of the variety of our way of thinking. And but this case is the worst of all. He has dismantling everything what Obama, or during the phase of Obama, has been done. His main purpose is to bankrupt our economy. That is, he has strengthened the measure of blockade against Cuba, and especially the extraterritorial part of this Helms-Burton law. In the last year, I will say, he has pressed so that no country could have trade to Cuba. He has strengthened measure of sanction so that Cuba could not receive the suppliers, the important supplier and raw material for its industry. Recently, he sanctioned some countries and some firmas that were transporting or shipping the oil, for example, from Venezuela that we buy. This administration tries to interfere in our program of tourism, to stop tourism. In the last 3 years, we have received an important number of American citizens that for the first time could travel to Cuba. Well, this administration interrupt this issue, and even he prohibited the visit and the traveler of the cruise as tourists to Cuba. And now they have increased an international campaign against the work that our medical teams, nurses, doctors, technicians of the health make all over the world. You know, Cuba is a reference in this world in healthcare. Cuba is a reference also in education, but in healthcare. And of course, Cuba is one of those countries that has invested in the formation of doctors in healthcare in order to help other countries, especially those countries from developing countries, but also is a way of have income for our economy. Well, he's following all these steps from Cuba in order to interrupt and interfere the development of our economy. So that is what I could say related to this issue.
Munish?
Excellency, you mentioned an important point that, India is doing a lot of economic diplomacy and development partnership with Africa. And you mentioned also that there is some growing relationship with Latin America and the Caribbean.
Yes.
How do you see and where do you see that happen? I mean, we had the Ecuador ambassador here, and he was talking about what India could do in terms of facilitating or helping the growth and development of Latin America and the Caribbean. And being an important partner, Cuba being an important partner of India, where do you see this relationship? Do you think it's happening? Do you want to see it grow? What would you like to see it grow?
Yes, of course, I would like to see a very, very faster development as what is now. But you know that the developing of the relation to sectors or to region, that doesn't happen from one moment to another. That takes time. And especially those relations in the economy field. That takes time. It's true that the concentration of the relation between India and Latin America was some important country more than with others. That is a reality. And for example, I would say one of the first Latin America country that has relation, economic and trade relation to India is Mexico. Let's mention Mexico. And we are very happy that it's so. Let's say Brazil. Brazil that of course, when I say Brazil, that is the government of, also the government of Lula that play a very, very important role in this direction. That is also the government from Dilma. So Brazil is another Argentinian, Chile. And I will say that the enterprises are beginning to have interest in the possibility of export to our region. Of course, when you compare the amount of exchange that exists to, let's say, to Asia, still little, or the amount of exchange that it exists now with the United States is also little. But we feel, according to the talking and according to what we have seen, that step by step, America, Latin America, and the Caribbean is also included in the economic relation and project of India. I say tourism is one important field in which we could more work, but for that you need something, and that is connectivity. Connectivity, and that is time. For example, Cuba has, we try to increase tourism. It's not easy, because one of the points for tourism is, of course, as I say before, connectivity. There is no direct fly. But in the last 3 years, I would say the number of Indian that have discovered Cuba as a tourist spot has increased. Let me not mention numbers, because that is tricky. Tricky for, you're a big country with 1,300 million people. Then if I name one number, then you will laugh. So please, but I mean, it's working, and I think this possibility exists because the Indian, according to what I've seen, those that have visited Cuba, they first they love nature. They love social contact. Others, of course, love go to the beach and so on, but they love nature, they love history. And there is also, in the last years, a group or a number of Indians that are traveling to America. When I say America, I mean Latin America. I mean Brazil, I mean Argentina, of course, also the United States. You have there big numbers of... Yes, how many?
4 million.
4 millions. Imagine. We wish that only 0.001% of Indian can travel to Cuba. Imagine, we don't have enough place for that. But 4 million. So we also have benefit from this kind of reality. And I tell you that the issue is that there is a political or decision, I would say, from the government of India to see Latin America and the Caribbean also as an important part of this world.
You should thank Salman Khan and Katrina Kaif, who shot Ekta tiger in Havana for the number of tourists which were going from India. Yeah.
Excellency, we are celebrating 60 years of bilateral ties between the two countries, Cuba and India. But I have a question, like in the 80s, the bilateral trade touched 300 million, and now it is about 38 million. Why this slump?
Mm-hmm. Well, I will say one of the reasons of that is the effect that the blockade has in our economy. remember that our economy has we affected in every year in pavilions dollars affected through the measure of the blockade. And that means that we cannot sell to a very, very important market like the United States. And we cannot even use as transfer dollar, one of the main yes,
Constraints.
yes. So that has an impact. Number two, because of that, we don't have cash money to pay immediately and import from India. And we have established, because of this reason, that we pay for import after almost a year. Almost a year, and that is, of course, an disadvantage. But that doesn't mean that the trade has decreased. Because what is happening? What is happening is that there are others, countries, or I will say 3 partners from other countries that they buy in India for us, and this partner, we can pay them a year after. So we are developing our trade relation with India, but not direct. We'll do it through a third partner.
Okay.
That is the reason why the amount of these trades has decreased in the last 2 years.
Vinita Pandey, then Manish Chan.
Excellency, my name is Vinita. I'm senior editor with the Asian Age Deccan Chronicle. So, the Latin American countries used to occupy a lot of our mind share once upon a time, but, post-Modi era, we don't see much of high-level exchanges. Do you also feel that pinch that we Indians are also feeling?
I didn't understand you.
The number of high-level
High level,
exchanges.
yes. Yes, well,
He said in the Modi era, you don't see the kind of high level.
yes, look, you put me a little bit, the question very difficult for me, no? Because I cannot speak in behalf of the Indian government, no? I mean, if you are beginning to look to Latin America, of course, you have to have a background, and you have to do that step by step. It's really, if you compare the high-level visit to other countries, is higher. Well, that is the priority right now. But I think that, for example, in 2018 and 2019, these 2 years, there have been organized high-level dialogue from ministers, from the vice president, and even from the president to Latin America in only 2 years. So, of course, in the way that the relation increase, in the way you make business, in the way you have a very, very positive result, in that same way will increase, of course, the high-level delegation. That's why I said the high-level delegation bring also the development of the economy.
Manish Chan.
Excellency Manish Chan, the India Rights Network. Excellency, China has been hugely successful in Latin America, and China's economic engagement with Latin America and Cuba is growing by the day. How do you look at the success and rising profile of China in your country and the larger region? And is this a good model for India to follow? I mean, you look at the bilateral trade, China with the region is around $300 billion. Compared to that, India is probably 1/6. So is that a good model to follow, or you think India should follow suit?
Well, let's see. You know that Latin American is a region that my neighbor has always seen this region exclusive for the Americans. Remember that in the 19th century, they apply in Latin America the so-called Monroe doctrine. That is America, Latin America, Caribbean for the North American. And of course, that was many years was seen as only an exclusive region for the relation to Latin America. I think the Chinese has broken this kind of principle or doctrine from the American, and they began to see, of course, that Latin America had a very big perspective also for the development of their own economy. A region with more than 6 million people, a region that has a lot of raw materials, oil, minerals, and so on, a region that could benefit the relation to the Chinese. And it's not only the Chinese, others have trying to be a factor, a new factor of presence in Latin America. And it seems that the business of the Chinese in that region has a very good result for them, it seems. And also, of course, for many Latin American. We, for example, our main economic partner today is China, because of many reasons. First, because there is a political willing of the Chinese leadership to develop and strengthen the relation between our two countries. Second, at the beginning, they saw that also Cuba could be a type of window or a type of door to penetrate or to come to Latin America. But anyhow, the reason is that Latin America and the Caribbean is a region in which they could develop good business, and they taken, of course, this chance. And I think this principle, this main principle that the Chinese has developed, I think that is a matter of priority. Is a matter of priority. Perhaps right now, your country, I mean India, has also other priorities, and they are not thinking likely like China that could be happening. But I tell you that I see, according to what I have read, according to what I have been speaking, there is a purpose to be present step by step in this region from India.
Thank you. Anil Bhatt.
Your Excellency, there is a memory one has of Mr. Fidel Castro and Mrs. Indira Gandhi. I think it's an iconic sort of a photograph, which is also reflective of the ties, even if we didn't have much to do with each other, a sort of a relationship, a friendship. The question I have for you, I will appreciate and understand if you don't or cannot answer it fully, but what's the state of defense cooperation between Cuba and India?
Defense
Yes.
cooperation.
In the defense field.
No, we don't have that kind of cooperation. I mean,
Do you see any future for it?
No, I don't think. We are not a military power. We don't produce even armament, weapons. The only thing that we produce is, and I don't think that not everybody will do that, is the willing to fight for our interests even in front of the main power. That is what we can deliver to many. But a kind of cooperation in that field, I think not even in the moment in which we had the best political dialogue with this country.
Thank you.
Dr. Jaykumar?
Good evening. I'm Jay Kumar. I'm a freelancer. You mentioned about your national poet
Jose Martin.
in your talk, yeah. And of course, you covered politics and trade and healthcare and everything. And when you talked about your national poet, I was thinking, what about the cultural relationship between India and Cuba, and have an exchange of writers and poets and arts, people in the arts? How do you think they will promote? You going to promote that aspect?
Yes, we are interesting. We are interesting to promote the cultural. We have cultural exchange, and of course we had before more cultural exchange. But to do that, I mean, I'm talking very, very frankly, no? To do that, you have to have money. And we are not in the corner, or we are not so near that with $500 you can travel and you can bring theater and you can bring Tropicana. Tropicana is the most known dancer company in Cuba. I mean, for that, you need money. But anyhow, they are being exchanged. We, for example, in Cuba, we have in our school some subjects that mention and that learned our young people, our scholar, and that is from Tagore, the principle of ethic of Tagore. And I think that this is a point, and we have knowledge, a result, but it's still insufficient. And that depends mainly, as I say before, the financial metals.
Last question.
Anyhow, if you work in this field and you could contribute or you can help that these cultural ties could develop, please. One of the main thing is to find sponsors. To find sponsors. And if we could find together a sponsor, I'm sure that could help. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, Ashok, you have a question. Use the microphone.
I always have I'm afraid from the question from Ashok, no?
Your Excellency, can we know something about Cuba's program in agriculture?
Mm-hmm. Well, remember that that's right. In the 60s, we were in agriculture. We only cultivated sugarcane, tobacco, and coffee. That was mainly. And at that time, I remember. Well, I was part of that. We were only 6 million of inhabitants. Now we are the double. So the main thing that the government of Cuba had to do was, how can we feed the people, the Cubans? We have land, that is correct. We had people that could work in the agriculture. And we developed a agrar reform. That was one of the most important law that the revolutionary government approved, and implemented in Cuba, the agrar reform, so that every Cuban that want to have a piece of land, to work on that land, and is able to work on that land, he could have it. So we introduced that. So we have made some modest result in that field, but in the last, I will say, in the last 10 years, we have some problems, mainly because of the lack of hands to work the land. So in Cuba, you know, we have a very, very high level of education. And a farmer, I don't know if here is the same, but in Cuba, a farmer has 5, 6 children, no? Because those are the ones that guarantee the work in the future and the land. We lost that. Why we lost that? We lost that because the main children, they became doctors, they became engineers, and nobody wanted to work on the land. So the country had to develop the technology in agriculture and make some reforms in agriculture. But we're still in a moment in which we have not been able to self-depend in food. We have developed in the last years an idea that is better to import than to produce them. But there are technologies that we have developed. There are some sectors in agriculture in which we have developed, but it's, like I say before, is also a question of market. I mean, market in the way that you can also export that kind of food in the neighborhood. Because our market in food was till the 90s was mainly Europe, with the socialist country of Europe and the Soviet Union. Also. And all that disappeared, and that had, of course, an impact in our agriculture, because we export citrus, a lot of citrus, sugar, a lot of sugar, and so on. But now we are developing those areas, and the main purpose of the government is to be efficient, self-sufficient in the production of food. We have also in the last year another element in food and the production of agriculture, and that is tourism. Tourism has the possibility also to develop other industry, other sectors of the economy. And one of the main sectors of this economy is agriculture. Because if you want to feed almost 5 million of foreigners, tourists that comes to Cuba, you have to produce land. And I will say that in the last year, we have a little bit of efficient in this, and now an important part of the farmers and the cooperative are bringing their product in the sector of tourism. And it's a business that I think is growing. I think this is the most important thing that I can say in tourism. Yes, in agriculture, yes.
Before I invite Munish Gupta to propose a vote of thanks, we have to do a couple of things. One is, Excellency, we are privileged to gift you honorary membership card of the FCC.
Oh, now I can make a lot of questions.
Right.
Oh, thank you.
And may I invite Alfredo, who is the Prensa Latina chief and also from Cuba, to present this memento, which is basically a mug specially designed to celebrate our 62nd year of existence, FCC. Alfredo?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, Munish, kindly propose a vote of thanks.
That is to drink beer, no?
Yeah, you can drink beer, yes.
Or coffee. But it's a lot of coffee. Okay, thank you, thank you.
Excellency, we leave that to you, whether you want to drink beer out of it or coffee. And you're most welcome to come out of this conference and then join us at the bar and start up on the beer. But thank you so much, Excellency, for joining us today. I particularly appreciate your format of keeping this very interactive. And I think a lot of us were able to gather a lot more information on the status of relations today and what Cuba thinks and is focusing on in the future. As Venkat said, you are an honorary member of the club now, and we hope you and the rest of your officials and diplomats from the embassy keep coming back and keep joining us for more interactions. And I would like to thank my friends from the Foreign Correspondents Club and otherwise who have joined us for this interaction today, to take the time out this evening. And thank you, Alfredo. Thank you, Alfredo. Alfredo is also, Excellency, a member of our managing committee.
Oh.
So this is a great addition we've had from Cuba in recent years. And have a very pleasant evening. And wish you and the rest of the country a very happy Indian budget. Good evening.
Thank you. Well, if you, I asked Alfredo, what can I bring to the club? Something Cuban. And of course, I could not bring a bottle of rum because he drank all my rum in the reception. But what I do, then I say, okay, I'll bring some cigars. They are not too much. I mean, each has 5 cigars. Those are 10 cigars. Those are Monte Cristo. Those are Cohiba, and 2 more. They say that after interviews and a lot of hard work from you in this kind of thing, you smoke a lot. So you have the whole night to smoke. Thank you.
Viva Cuba.
Okay.
Thank you, friends.
Okay.